with all of the this is a continuation part two of the haboo, followed by a brief wujo. It's going to probably end up being done in chunks. I've got to let reality intrude and deal with the comings and goings of things around here. And so I'll just stop and we'll upload it in small bits. It gets up quicker that way anyway. And I don't think that the continuity is really broken up. So at this point, you're going to be offered the chance to pause here and go and look at the Max Kaiser video. You needn't watch all of it if you don't want to. It's really interesting. I found it quite fascinating, especially the guy from Overstocked at the last half. In any event, the you get the idea when you see the image and hear them discuss the idea of immortality. And so then let's go back a couple of years. We'll call it a couple of years. And I'll start personalizing this now. And I've got my tea here. We'll have to stop perhaps if the dog wants back in. In any event, here's where the story gets kind of interesting. At a personal level, in any event. My father, come on, camera, I'm right here. Come on, where's it, my glasses? No, there it is, okay. My mother was in the military. He was in Vietnam. I won't go into any details that are not pertinent. None of them are pertinent here. He had an occasion at one point to assist a fellow. The fellow was in dire straits. My father was an officer. This guy was a lieutenant at the time, I believe. I'm not quite sure. Maybe he was a captain. In any event, it was many years ago in the late 60s, 68, and Tet Offensive, actually. And so this fellow he assisted survived and was reasonably grateful for the assistance. And years later, decades later, my father has passed. He's died. And I happen to be working in a category as a programmer in a building in which they did interesting things related to telephony and other kinds of activities involving software. And these things that they did involved lots of people like myself that were programmers. So there was a lot of people working there. Maybe 1,000 for all I know. It was a big place. Anyway, it was a rented space. Or no, they actually owned the building, I believe, the people I worked for. But within that building, there were several other areas that we didn't occupy, our corporate endeavor. And so they rented these spaces out. And one day I happened to be walking in next to this guy who was about my height, older than I, and totally bald, and including no eyebrows, no beard or anything, puffing on a cigar like Daddy Warbucks, walking around out in front of this building. And he sort of stops me and he looks at me like really funny, and he says, he said, without the beard, he said, you really remind me of somebody. And see, I get this a lot because, in the military anyway, when we were around military bases, because anybody that had ever known my father, there's a distinct facial resemblance. Anyway, though, so, and this fellow I was looking at, Baldy here, he was about the right age, so I hazard that it was indeed my dad, and sure enough, that was the case. And he told me the connection, and so, scrunched that part of the story down. He sort of thought I was kind of cool, just because I was a connection to his past and that particular incident. And I was aware of the incident. My father had told me about it when he'd come back. It was a really interesting time for him and so on. Anyway, so Baldy at that point was a retired general, and Baldy was in working for a corporation that had leased a big chunk of the building we were in. And Baldy was General Baldy here. He was the head of this local division of this corporation. Corporation was named after one of those titans, one of those demigods, the moons of Saturn and Jupiter and all of that. So we'll call the corporation Apollo. And so Apollo Inc. here occupied a big chunk of the building, as I say, and they had their own T3 lines in, secure kind of crap all over to hell and gone, and all kinds of filtery stuff on their phone lines and power lines, and basically it made their area a big Faraday cage as well. They'd come on in and lined all the walls and this sort of thing, which was relatively easy. The place was set up for computers. We had, the pop-up floors, the walls came off in segments so you could get at all the wiring and stuff like that. And the ceiling, of course, was, just basically a hung drop-down ceiling with all those nasty fluorescent lights. Anyway, Baldy is working there, and I'm working in this other part of the building. We don't cross much. He's at that time, well, I think he's like maybe probably 15 years older than I am. Anyway, but occasionally we'd run into each other, and it was a rather congenial relationship. And then I go on, and over time he became aware of me with some of my private software stuff when I started developing software engines on my own and was selling software products. And so, as part of their corporate things, once I gave a presentation. They didn't buy, but they were interested in the concept of the product, so they probably stole it. But in any event, this outfit worked Apollo here, General Baldy's subdivision, but all of Apollo, as far as I know, was basically a military subcontractor here in the United States in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. And they do all kinds of military stuff. And so along comes the great George Bush attack on the Middle East, and in which they rig up the whole fake attack on the Twin Towers, which were a losing proposition, and they had to get rid of. That guy was just losing money right and left, hardly any occupancy, all the reasons, and so it's a big put up job. They get all of the 75% of the American populace that's just wants to go along to get along, and is deliberately blind or is blind and not paying any attention, not aware at all. They get them to go along with this idea, and let's go attack the Middle East. And so we get the George Bush wars in Iraq and stuff. And Apollo is like, oh, they're slathering at the, drooling all over themselves because they're a military contractor and they do all kinds of weird stuff. And a lot of their stuff was like, I always got the vibe out of it. I mean, they weren't, I was in there once, right, or twice. I was in their facility twice before the Iraq War, and I got the vibe that it was very much like men who stare at goats. We're talking fringe level, weird, psychological kind of crap, military contractor stuff here, right? And so, anyway, I'd gone off to other work. We have the Iraq War, and Apollo Inc. goes off here with General Baldy, and they go off into the Iraq War, and they find themselves and their employees involved in some really terrible stuff. Terrible stuff that comes out all over the internet that we're all aware of, and it made you really sad to even be associated with America. With the American military, and all of this, these were people that were clearly out of control, doing stuff worse than any of the dictators that we'd ever theoretically tried to overthrow. We were really supporting them the whole time and put them in power, all of this kind of stuff. Basically evil, twisted, screwed up world. And so Apollo's doing well. They're an evil, twisted, screwed up organization. Only they get a big lot of backlash from the public part of the nastiness that they're involved in. And we're talking the ultimate nastiness that came out of that war. If it was really disgusting and made you wanted to throw up, and you maybe threw up and cried, they were probably involved with it. It was really, really that level. And it was so bad for them that at the end of this, they're part of that. They got out maybe, I don't know, reasonably early out of this thing, out of this debacle. So, because my next contact with them was in, I think it was like 2013, maybe. Yeah, it was 2013. I'd already started working on the Proa here. So anyway, and I had kale around and lettuce, and so they were doing some work on the property. Anyway, and so my next contact with them then is after the war, and they've changed their name. I got an invitation through sort of a back channel here from old General Baldy. Only he wasn't working for Apollo. They had some new name that was like, 1, 2, or 3 characters and dot and then ink, that kind of thing. Like WTF, only it's not that. But anyway, so it's just they changed their name because the Apollo name got a little trashed because of the activity and the many, many, many photos of nasty things that came out. Excuse me. So. Anyway, so I get this backhanded invitation from General Baldy. Now we're getting back into real time here again. And this is in like 2013 or so. And I thought, oh, okay, sure, I wasn't doing much at the time. There was a lot of work and stress as usual. But I was able to take the day off, and he'd invited me to come on over to lunch and an interesting presentation. I thought, okay, this is kind of cool. You know, he always the vibe was always a little weird, but I knew at least within reason I didn't feel threatened by him simply because he respected my abilities as a programmer and my brains, and also because of his association with my father. And you know, he always sort of, I think he felt paternal to me, like he owed me, you know, because he owed my dad. And so you know, I thought, okay, I'll go. So I go on over there, and this was a very interesting thing. A very terrible cook, by the way. They'd hired this guy. I come on in, I tell him I'm a vegetarian, and that threw him for a loop. It's like, oh my God, you know, we've got this strange exotic creature here. What do we do? You know, what kind of substance do we try and offer it for lunch? And they gave me this sandwich, a digression here, with big chunks of cucumber in it. It's like, no, guys, that's not vegetarian food. A person can't live on cucumber sandwiches. Maybe some dainty, you know, woman from the Victorian era where her waist is cinched down to 11 damn inches, you know, so that nothing can pass anyway. Maybe she can exist on a cucumber sandwich, but not me. I need real stuff. But I'm prepared for this. I've been there. See, I've worked with these corporate guys before, and I've run into the same kind of thing before. Really high-powered chefs in Chicago, New York, and London. London, I was shocked at. You know, they're so cosmopolitan. I would have thought better, but in all three cases, they're working for these very large corporations. They at that level, they provide food while all the other people are sitting around doing stuff, hearing presentations, and so on. And you know, you get lunch and stuff, and they have kitchens built into these upper echelon presentation rooms, which are, you know, better than any five-star hotel you've ever seen. In any way, but they always end up giving you bad vegetarian food in Chicago, New York, and in London. It was just terrible. I got some really good stuff in Texas and Mexico. Oh man, Mexico City. That's the place to go for vegetarian food on this continent. They were a little surprised too in Mexico, but the guy he was totally didn't bother him, didn't phase him a bit. He, you know, si senor, and he came back, and most excellent breakfast I'd ever had. And then we had an 8.3 earthquake. The earthquake was not his fault. Breakfast was really good. Anyway, though, so getting back to the story here, I get hauled on over to this really interesting lunch that mostly I didn't eat, but of course I always bring along extra nutrition in the form of, you know, crunchy energy bars, this kind of thing, just enough to get me through. And so I'm munching away on one of those, and you know, I was in this presentation room. We were all fed. There was a little bit of a sort of an overview. I started to get the gist of things there. That it was, I was basically, when I was brought into the area, General Baldy greeted me and said, you know, explained the terms as to why I was there, and I agreed to him, and I said sure. Then he takes me back in through the more secure area. They were in a new building at this point, one that they'd bought and occupied totally. Still in our local area. I had to drive some distance, but not too bad. I'm in Olympia, Washington, Pacific Northwest coast of North America, by the way. Anyway, so so I get into the room, and the terms were fine. It was, you know, eat, have lunch, basically keep your mouth shut. He gave me a little cover story. No one expected anybody in that room to ask anybody else anything personal about who they were, where they were from, any background information. There was just no chit chat. It's one of those kind of things. It was okay to discuss the subject matter that was being presented, okay to bring up thoughts on it, but basically you weren't to ask, you know, oh hey, what do you do? You know, because you don't want to know what this guy does. Anyway, so and he certainly doesn't want you knowing, and he doesn't want to know what you do, and maybe he does know what you do, and that's bad enough. Anyway, though, so I agreed. It was kind of interesting, you know, and I've been around this world before, you know, given the crap my dad was involved with. So anyway, so terrible lunch is over after about 25 minutes. I'd gotten there late, and we head off into this big presentation room, and it's really spooky. It's a little mini auditorium. Didn't even know it existed in the building. They'd hollowed out a couple of floors, built these really nice presentation with the giant video screens that are all linked together. So you got basically a movie theater size screen if you want, or you can split it into, I think there were eight. I think there were 8 panels that composed it. Oh, hang on a second. I'm going to get the dog in. We'll have to break, and I'll come right back.